Good morning. How are you? This is May 7th, 2024, and I think I'll just shut the door. And for the record, if you would please just state your name and address.
My name is Matthew Giltner. My current address is 2557 Hemming Lane, Minden, Nevada, 89423.
Okay, and Mr. Giltner, you are originally in New York.
I am. I was born and raised in Shenango County. Well, primarily raised in Shenango County, down in Norwich, the county seat. I also spent a fair amount of time in the Capital District, in Bethlehem and Albany area.
Excellent. So you are familiar with the area.
Very.
Okay, so why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your early years and how you got involved in the service.
I am of the belief that there are 2 or 3 different reasons that people join the military. One of them is family tradition, my father, my father's father's father, that type of thing. There's also those that look at the mythos that surrounds the military and how you can go out there and to borrow from our ground pounder friends, the Army, be all that you can be. And then there's also people, and I think that I personally fall into that third group, which was I was not mature enough to go off to college after high school, but I also was not quite ready to be a roofer for the rest of my life, which is something I did right out of high school. So had the opportunity to meet somebody who had been in the Coast Guard, and in talking to him, okay, maybe this is propaganda. He's like, yeah, all we do is we just went over the horizon and fished all day. I'm like, that doesn't sound too horrible. But my life has always been to take the paths that are not taken by many. And not that I'm any sort of rugged individualist or anything along those lines.
You and Thoreau.
Yeah, and to this day, people are like, Coast Guard, is that the National Guard? I'm like, no, it's not. Because people don't know what we do. Everything from the Baywatch comments to, drug interdiction, all that kind of stuff. Everybody has like these weird little compartments that they know about, but no one knows the broad mission except for the people who have done the broad mission. So that's how I landed there.
So when you were thinking about joining the service, what did you know about the Coast Guard?
Very little. Very, very little.
And what led you to the Coast Guard?
I honestly don't remember. Like I said, it was just one of those things where I had met somebody, and I think maybe we had a conversation, but there wasn't a whole lot of in-depth research on my part. But the one thing is that I'm also, this is a philosophical conversation we could really go down some rabbit holes on, but I'm also a big believer that there are people who believe that there is service higher than themselves, and I'm not talking about a deity, but where you can add value to society. I fall into that category. I mean, even today, I turned 60 in a few weeks, and I'm still and have been my entire life in some sort of public service.
I think a lot of people who join the military have that in mind.
I think that's fair.
I mean,
that's
I
very
hope
fair.
so, and I certainly think so, and that's very admirable.
Yeah, it is. And then you go through boot camp.
Okay, so explain away.
And that sometimes changes your opinion of the military. Personally, for me, boot camp was nothing. I'm very good at compartmentalizing mission task success.
Where were you for that, by the way?
And where was boot camp?
Yes.
Boot camp for the Coast Guard was and is still in Cape May, New Jersey. So I was forced, you're going to hear this a lot today, I was forced to go to Cape May, New Jersey in the summer, where they only gave you 1 week off to go over to Wildwood. Only 1 week.
My God. Well, Cape May itself is very pretty.
I was going to say,
been there.
what I do for America. So so boot camp itself was I think, unremarkable. You want to hear a fun story?
Of course.
So my company commander, Coast Guard uses company commanders versus drill sergeants, but it's the same role. Guy's name is Carl Willis. He was a chief bosun mate at the time. And at one point, the way boot camp runs for whatever, 8-10 weeks, whatever it was, and towards the end of your time there, in the summertime, the recruits would play the company commanders in a softball game. It's a big morale thing. The company commanders would always slaughter the recruits because the recruits get to play a game in a 2-month period, and the company commanders are playing in leagues and whatever. So their teamwork ethos is what, as a softball team, is something hopefully they would be able to transmit to their recruits. So while we were there, one of the companies junior to us beat the company commanders, and this was unheard of.
Wow.
So because I can occasionally be a smartass, went up to Chief Willis and I said, "Sir, is it true, or is it just a rumor that we are hearing, a recruit rumor, that the company commanders lost a softball game to the recruits?" And he's like, "Senior Recruit Giltner, first of all, I wasn't there. So not all their best players were able to play." I'm like, "But sir, you..." And it digressed into I want to let you know that had I been there, it would have made a difference because I'm being recruited by 5 different teams or whatever it is on this base at this time. And I said, "Sir, yes, sir, I saw you speaking to a member of the Sugar Bears," which was the women's softball league. And he looked at me and he basically said, "You have 1 second to get out of my view." So that in its own self should give you pretty much some insight into my personal character. Fast forward 5-6 years, whatever it was, I'm in a supermarket in Florida, and this guy walks up to me and goes, "Hey bud, how you doing?" I'm like, "Fine." No idea who this guy is, and I continue on with my shopping, and guy comes around the corner again and goes, "You don't remember me, do you?" I'm like, "No." He goes, "I'm Carl Willis. I was your CC in boot camp." So here's, you figure, here's a guy that puts thousands of kids through training.
Right.
5 years later, in a supermarket in some random place, he picks me out and remembers me. I had no clue who he was. But the funny thing was, I kept running into him throughout my career, again and again and again, which is not difficult in the Coast Guard at 35-ish thousand people. It's kind of like New York City Fire and New York City Police have more people than are in the Coast Guard. So it's not really rare when someone says, "Do you know so-and-so?" Because it could happen. So boot camp was unremarkable, and anybody that does watch this is thinking about going to the military, all boot camp is unremarkable. Everything that the company commanders are trying to do is to build up your teamwork and your skill sets so that you can perform when you're done, and that you can rely and you can trust your shipmates or your teammates or your battle buddy or whatever the right term is in the ground pounder world. It's not hard. Just put that behind you. They want you to do 1,000,000 push-ups, do 1,000,000 push-ups. Lord knows I did 1,000,000 push-ups when I was in boot camp for some reason. So, so boot camp was unremarkable.
Okay, so what happened after that?
So after boot camp, I took my first of 2 icebreaker tours up on a coastal icebreaker out of South Portland, Maine. I was on the Yankton first, named after the Yankton tribe in South Dakota. I think they're the Arundel class or the Abenaki class of tugboats. 110 feet long, reinforced hull, made for harbor work, but basically we broke ice everywhere, up to Bangor, up the Penobscot River, Martha's Vineyard. Again, places I had to go for the government.
You suffered.
I suffered. And that was kind of a neat deal because we worked for a W4, Warrant 4, who was the captain, and then you had a chief boatswain as the executive officer, and then a chief mechanic as the engineering officer. But what's fascinating about that is, unlike the Army, and that's the only one I can speak to that I know specifically, warrant officers are senior enlisted, and then they kind of fall into this weird officer but not enlisted zone. Whereas in the Army, you go to warrant officer school and then you can be flying helicopters. So it's just different. But the neat thing about it is by the time you're a warrant officer in the Coast Guard and presumably the Navy as well, you have so much time in that nobody can mess with you. We were in Southwest Harbor, Maine, and it was a summer patrol, I think. either way, so we're tied up at the base there, and we're on the rec deck playing pool, and they had a Pepsi machine full of beer that the officer, they would come out and turn off at 10 o'clock, so no pound of beers till sunrise. And he did that, and the skipper walked over and plugged it back in. And the OD, who's something like E4, E5 or something, like, you can't do it. He's like, look, I'm a W4. There are no W5s in the Coast Guard, so go F yourself. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to work with this guy. So that was kind of a cool deal. That was the first unit that I decommissioned. Pretty much every unit that I've been in the Coast Guard timed out while I was there, got shut down, realigned, or otherwise disintegrated while I was there or shortly after. So I kind of have a bit of a complex. It's like, yeah, Giltner's here, but so you better get your resume up to date because your dream sheet. So from there, we went to the Apalachee, and this is another great government story. Yankton was a really, really good boat, ship, cutter, whatever. Maintenance was exceptional, a lot of pride in the crew. So one of the things that you learn if you ever do any teamwork or leadership, training or in those positions, that if you have staff who is that has pride in their what they're doing, the material condition of what they're doing is superior. I like to use the example that no one's ever washed a rental car, right? Because you're like, screw it, it's a rental car, give it back. Same thing, but if you're working, living, or whatever, you want that ship to be really, in ship shape, using a really lame but obvious metaphor. So what happens is Yankton is slated for a dry dock period, which is expensive. Typical scrape the bottom, weld holes, whatever you do in a shipyard. Mm-hmm. And this class of ship was then being starting to be replaced by the new Coast Guard 140s. The 140s, the Bay class, are the ones that, like, there's one in Bayonne, New Jersey, that does the Hudson all the way up to Albany. They also have a couple of the 65-footers, which predate my time in the military, which is a long time ago. So either way, they decided to take one of the harbor tugs out of Baltimore, Curtis Bay, I think, the Apalachee, and swap them out. Because they're the same class, generally speaking. You cross-deck over and you're good to go. Yeah. The problem was that the people that had been stationed on that boat for years prior had no pride in their work. So we likely spent more time and money and effort to bring that boat up to standard to run it offshore, which is what we did, versus just tooling around in Curtis Bay, Maryland. So again, it's one of those, the government prints the money, and I guess sometimes I wonder if they even track it, but whatever. So that's another philosophical conversation for another day.
Yeah, it looks like from the sheet that you filled out, you were stationed almost exclusively in the Northeast. One in Key West, but other than that, from New Jersey up to Maine.
Well, yes. However, the Key West tour, again, what I did for America. That ship was another dry dock queen. We spent more time in dry dock than we did in the 3 years I was on there. We were in the shipyards for more than half of that time. That boat was brought in specifically during the Mariel boat lift. A lot of assets went in because they needed to be turned on in short order to deal with the Cuban exodus. But as a result, I always joke that the Coast Guard motto, Semper Paratus, doesn't mean always ready. What it means is don't throw that away, we'll take it. But that is another one of those money pits that the Coast Guard got into. Same thing with the Yankton and Apalachee. They could have done so much better just taking the material differences between the two and take the superior boat and leave it out. I probably should stop calling them boats, because any sailor sees this, they're going to have a fit.
Now, how much of your duty, you mentioned the Mariel boat, how much of your duty involved people who were leaving other places to try to come here? A lot. When we were in Key West, we did, on Lipan, we did a lot of AMIO, alien migrant interdiction ops, and narcotic stuff. So we probably balanced, I'd say 40-60%, where 60% would be narcotics,
interdiction, which is another funny story. But picking up Haitians and Cubans were, I mean, it was just routine. Like, look, guy in an inner tube. And we went out. There was one time when we were on Lipan. Lipan was a 205-foot salvage tug that the Navy got rid of in Papago class, I think. Anyway, really big, heavy boat. And it never went anywhere fast, but it was really stable. We were out, we went through the eye of Hurricane Elena twice at sea, which is phenomenally cool and phenomenally scary. Basically what had happened was we were going to assist somebody who had, I think they had disabled their steering or something, a mechanical issue, up south of New Orleans, Pensacola, and that part of the Gulf Coast. And we were hiding south of Cuba at the time because that's what you do at sea is you run away from the hurricane. So we went up towards Pensacola to help this freighter out. And the storm overtook us, ran us over on our way there. And by the time we got up to where, 60, 80 miles away from the sky, it's like, oh no, I got it fixed, thanks a lot. So then we turned around and started heading south again, and that particular storm, I think, touched the coast like 3 times before it finally made landfall, and it ran over us a second time as well. So, yeah,
so
it was exciting.
It sounds like, if I'm reading your sheet here, you were involved in a few things fairly regularly. One was the drug addiction, as you said, and there's a funny story that we'll get to in a second that you wrote about. And then,
I remember what I wrote.
Okay, I will. And then there's the people who were trying to get away from Haiti or Cuba, and then there were just the people who had a problem out there, and you were helping them.
I know which one you're talking about.
Okay, well, maybe we'll start with, because you started with it, the people who were coming over here from other countries. When you pick them up, what would happen next?
Well, it depends. The one that I think is, for me anyway, is the most seared into my brain. The Coast Guard cutter Cape Morgan, I hope I'm remembering that correctly, 95-foot patrol boat based on Key West as well, had picked up something in the neighborhood of 60, 80 migrants, likely Haitians, again from memory. And the weather was horrible. And on a 95-foot boat, you have no place to put that many people. You can't put them inside. So typically what you do is you put them on the stern, but even that fills up. I mean, you're talking a 95-foot boat with a width of maybe 30 feet-ish, maybe. And not enough life jackets. You've got a relatively junior commanding officer. The 95s and the 82s would have like a lieutenant junior, an 03 or 02, 03, in that general area. I mean, but what they do on that particular thing is they would put in a senior enlisted as the executive officer, senior chief boatswain or something along those lines. So it kind of balances out. But I can remember we got underway from Key West. We were in a maintenance period, which for Lipan was all the time. We got underway with about half of our crew because it was like we needed to get out there right now. And when we got on scene, the Cape Morgan was into the seas because that gives you the most stability. The last thing you want to do is wind up side to side. And it looked like the photographs that you see now of migrants crossing the Met, where you've got 500 people in metaphorically in a 5-foot boat. And I can just remember the tone of their CO, their lieutenant, on the radio, not fully panicked, but boy, it was close. It was like, get these people off here right now, right now, right now. And we're like, hold on, we're getting life jackets. He's like, screw the life jackets. Get them off my boat, because he was afraid that they were going to capsize.
So then what would you do with them?
So what we did is we pulled up with a 205-foot boat, and we put our launch in. We had 2 launches, 20-ish foot, whatever, inflatable ribs, and went over and we started pulling people off. We still use the life jackets like
you're panicking. We're gonna, no matter what, this is gonna get better, but it takes time. And I mean, we probably spent 3 or 4 hours pulling people off because you can't do it quick. So, I mean, you're talking seas that are, easily 15 to 20 foot, and that just kicks your ass.
Were the people grateful that you were helping them?
It's hard to say. I think they're great. The Morgan crew was certainly grateful. The migrants, less so. I honestly don't even remember what we did with them as far as disposition goes. There are a number of triggers that happen on what you do with migrants. If they're inside territorial waters, you bring them here. If they're outside, you bring them there. We brought a lot of people in, migrants in and out of Guantanamo Bay before it was still a Navy base. Gitmo's funny. I don't know if you're talking about it that's been there when it was still an active military base. You could play golf there.
Really?
Yeah, they had a golf course. But here's what's really funny. Castro at the time had shut the freshwater system off to the base because his idea was screw you. Oh, by the way, Castro never cashed a single check that the U.S. Navy paid in rent. So,
really?
Yeah. But so what would happen is they would water the tees and the greens and nothing else. So you'd carry a piece of carpet, you'd hit the ball, and it would land in like sand and rubble. And then you'd pick it up, put the ball on your carpet, and we used to call it lunar golf. It was like playing golf on the moon.
Wow.
So,
You did what you had to.
yeah. So anyway, so that was the big, and we did some ops where we brought Haitians back into Haiti, dropped them in border prints. And you would think, it's like, these people, and this is one of the weird things, because you see it on the news now, it's always, migrants. You have people who are leaving horrible economic conditions, horrible political, violent conditions, and they're looking at the United States as a haven. Are all of them fitting in that category? Absolutely not. But there's a significant number that are. I don't have a solution for that. But it's just one of those things that the amount of drive it took for somebody to walk from, I don't care, Panama to Texas, I mean, that's a gigantic undertaking. It's got to be very important. Right. But at the same time, if we go back in history and you take a look at why so many of the early colonists, say pre-1750-ish, came here, it wasn't for economic freedom. It was for religious freedom or to escape tyranny. And if you go further, you take a look into the 19th century, the first German exodus, pretty sure it's first or second German exodus, where they were all leaving Prussia because they were going to be conscripted. So there was a huge push to get out of the country before you had to go free. So this is none of this is new. None of this is new. It's just current.
When you had to take the people back to Haiti, what was their reaction?
I can't imagine they were happy about it. I can't speak to what their reactions were because it's just rote. It's like, here we are, onto the dock, and there you go. Not our problem. And they were a consular guy would be there on the dock to process them back in. But it's weird. It's garbage. I mean, there's no other way to put it. There's so much strife everywhere, economic or crime or whatever. When I become king of the world, sweeping changes.
Okay, I look forward to that. Now, the drug interdiction, that was one of the other things. And the story that you wrote about was how you wound up on a sailboat and someone basically told you he had marijuana. How'd you wind up on the boat? Were you concerned about there being drugs, or was this just a routine check?
Routine. Absolutely. So we on Lipan we did 30-ish patrols while we were there, between 25 and 30, whatever. And we had drug seizures on all but one of them, which in its own right is pretty funny because that was the one patrol that the executive officer, who nobody particularly cared for,
which is actually the role of the executive officer, is to be the hammer, so no one ever likes the XO. When he took the boat as the acting captain, it was the only one we didn't get a drug seizure. So this, I live for irony. So anyhow, we were, I can't remember the name of the boat. Sweet Solitude, maybe?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it.
Either way, it could have been any number of them, but 30, 40-foot sailboat, father, 12-year-old son. We go in and do the normal stuff. U.S. boats, U.S. registered vessels, no matter where they are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States Coast Guard, period. And then there's certain conventions that we had, presumably are still in place, between the UK, for example, so any of their protectorates are part of the United Kingdom. We can enforce U.S. laws on their boats as well. So typical idea is you come up along the sky, if they're headed north, you call them on the radio, say, how you doing? You go through this little checklist, where you been, where you're going, next port of call, what's your ETA, and if things are just casual, which they generally are, we send over 4 or 5 man team on a sailboat. There would be no more than 4 plus 2 people on the launch. Get in, you're inspecting, it's all safety inspection stuff. Check for fuel in the bilges, life jackets, flares, and then just a small interview with the captain. And these are things where we had one drug seizure where I was talking to one of the first mates, or senior commercial guy, whatever. I'm not licensed mariner anymore. But anyway, and his story conflicted with what the rest of the crew was talking about, and that raised our suspicion, and we would spend more time there. In this particular instance, we were done. I mean, literally done. Like, shake your hand, have a nice day, really great seeing you. Be careful when you get closer to Cuba because they're not, that kind of stuff. Done. And the boarding officer goes, "What's in there?" Points to the line locker, which is a little, hatch that opens up underneath the helm. The guy goes, "Marijuana." You're like, oh man. You were done because you would have had your little sheet. So if anybody else would come, it's like, no, it's just boarded by the Coast Guard yesterday. You were golden.
So
But
what
he told
should he
the
have
truth.
said?
He said marijuana.
No, but what should he have said?
He should have said, "No, that's why I put my fenders, my line, or it's just a line locker."
You wouldn't have bothered to open it.
No, because everything was super casual.
Right.
He looked like just, I got my kid and we went, took the summer off sailing or whatever it was.
Right.
So,
well,
yeah.
I guess it says on here that he wound up in jail.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, at the time it was a 0 tolerance, 20 years in jail for drug smuggling. And it is weird because I always frame it this way, which is I know that personally I'm a very small cog in this gigantic thing, but we spend a lot of time putting people in jail for 20 years. 20 years ago, which means, but so, and it's weird, and on the drug thing, which is really, really funny, I think it's really funny, now that marijuana is becoming legal pretty much everywhere, I think half the states, relatively speaking, you can go to a dispensary and buy marijuana for recreational use, or as some of us were being able to sleep through the night to shut your brain off. So I spent years arresting people, putting them in jail for smuggling drugs, and pot in particular. Now I get 10% off at the dispensary.
Wow.
So it's come full circle.
Were there any drug seizures where you were physically threatened? Where they were looking to fight? Or?
Nah, I don't even know that we even had anybody that ran from us. It got to the point where it was, if they ran, big deal. But generally speaking, a lot of it was, well, you caught us. There was one there's a boat, fishing boat with no gear on board. That's not suspicious at all. Off of Dry Tortugas, which is the last little island in the Florida chain that's where Dr. Mudd was imprisoned after treating John Wilkes Booth. Right. So Fort Jefferson's out there, but up in the flat up behind there was a boat that was anchored. And again, it was I'm not positive it may not have been a U.S. registered fishing boat, a dragger, trawler. And I was not on the boarding, but I was on the nav team because I was a navigator. Watching the shotgun guy climb onto the back of the fishing boat, he trips, Shotgun goes skidding across the deck. Bad guy picks it up and hands it back to him. You're like, way to go, Bruce.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Let me move on to
sure.
the third of, I guess it seems, the regular things you're involved in. I guess that would be rescues.
Yeah.
Helping people who are having problems out there. Any particular story that sticks in your mind?
A lot. So I did 20 years active duty, and of the 20 years, 14 of them I was a search and rescue mission planner. So I was at the Atlantic Area Command Center, which covers about 14 million square miles of ocean, as our specific zone. They have, and they were the supervising command for everything on the East Coast, literally from the Mississippi River to Europe. So cases, pardon me, cases that are well known include TWA Flight 800. There's a lot of these things that are really kind of weird for me, and I apologize if I get a little bit, whatever,
No, okay.
Not flowing as well as I could.
That's okay.
Flight 800, I was at that point, I was at Sandy Hook, the Coast Guard base there, doing the same thing as an ops guy. And when we had jet fuel soaked debris and personal items floating up on the beach, there's things that, for me, I don't know what it is with smell. I can still smell that woman's toiletry case. And where it's even more peculiar is after I left the Coast Guard, retired, I flew jets for a few years. And you're walking around in jet fuel a lot. And it's just like a constant hamster wheel. So that's kind of screwy. But other things like the Andrea Gale, which anybody watching this has probably seen the movie The Perfect Storm. Can we stop recording for just 1 second? Is it? Move along. Cool.
Okay, so
but
we're talking about the recovery after Flight 800 went
Yeah,
down.
so one of the most fascinating things about that job and why I think that particular focus was so interesting for me is that every mission was relatively different. I mean, the principles are the same on how you're going to be successful in resolution, but they're never exactly the same. One of my proudest moments it was a sailing vessel, the Great American. Nobody's ever heard of this, except for the people that are on it. It was a trimaran, 3 hulls, that was trying to break the sailing speed record from Boston to San Francisco, around the southern tip of South America. And I had read an article about it, just random. This is back when newspapers actually were on paper. So I'd read an article about it, like, oh, that's kind of neat, whatever. In one ear, out the other. Fast forward, a month or 2 or 3 or whatever it was, and they had started this particular trip. We got an alert. Nowadays, it all comes through your sat nav, and it goes up to a satellite and gives you this 406 beacon, the black box on airplanes and all that stuff. Same type of general. I'm being really general in this description. But at the time, this would have been probably late 1980s, mid 1990s, somewhere in that time frame. The technology wasn't there yet. So we got a distress thing that popped up on our printer, and all it said was Great American. Didn't give a position, didn't tell you anything about the boat. And we're like, so we called the Argos people. They were a private company, I think a French company. And they're like, no, just Great American, that's all we can tell you. And one thing led to another, and we tracked it down on a telephone that was actually wired to the wall. We tracked it down. These were the guys that were doing, trying to break this record. And it was literally because I had read this article, totally random. However, they had somersaulted their catamaran off the southern tip of South America in mountainous seas. The New Zealand Pacific, at the time, the world's largest refrigerator ship, was around, in the area, because we had, I guess it's still out there, AMBER, the Automated Merchant Emergency Vessel Assistance Program, where you can type in, at the time you would type in a position and a radius, it would tell you all the ships that are participating and you could vector somebody in. So we called the New Zealand Pacific and to talk to the captain of the New Zealand Pacific afterwards. He goes, it was so strange because it's mountainous seas, we can't see anything. All of a sudden we see this little bulb and it's this upside down sailboat. So they lay on their horn and the captain goes, the most amazing thing happened. Hatch opens up on the bottom and his head pops out. So the New Zealand Pacific, again, mountainous seas, and the biggest ship ever made for this type of work. So you're talking 40, 50 foot freeboard, pulls up next to him, two guys hop into the accommodation door, close the door and go on their way. The captain says, I will never, ever be able to recreate that. I couldn't do it again if he told me to do it today. It was just totally happenstance. So these guys are alive, or they were, I don't know where they are today. They're alive, and it was one of those rare moments where everything worked out exactly the way it should, and it was only because we, as a team, all put this together and were able to put together a successful mission. So it's kind of a cool gig.
Right.
So there's a couple of those.
So,
Yeah, I call those the luckiest motherfuckers on the planet.
There
List.
you go. Okay. So I want to move forward
Sure.
now. 9/11, you were stationed in the New York area.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to let you basically tell
So,
us what happened.
well, September 11th is it's going to sound really weird. To me, not the most significant mission that we ran. Not because significant, maybe it's not the right word. Everything we did surrounding the terrorist attacks. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed on there, but I was actually on duty for both times they tried to blow up the World Trade
That's
Center.
right.
So,
I read that. Okay, yeah, so let me actually
So
go back to
basically a shit
1993. Yeah, so what happened in 1993? What's your involvement on that?
and to be honest, I don't remember a lot about it because it was kind of like because at the time we didn't know. At the time, all we knew was there was a fire and explosion.
Right, like
under
explosion
World Trade.
in the garage or something.
Yeah, you know, so you're kind of like, oh, that's interesting or whatever. But it knocked out part of the subway system, and I was late for work. That was the big the big mission. But it was kind of interesting in hindsight, you know, that here I am going on to start the night shift at 1800, you know, trying to get to work in the middle of the afternoon and couldn't because the World Trade Center had been attacked. And then fast forward, 13 years or something like that, whatever it was, I don't remember.
From 93 to 01, you mean?
Yeah, so that would be 18 years.
8 years.
Or 8 years? Math is hard.
There you go.
Sorry, liberal arts major. Yeah, so that would, I mean, to me it's just a random coincidence, except if you look back at like all the perfect example is, I don't even remember what natural disaster, it was COVID. I'm like, for the first time in my entire life, things are going completely sideways and I have nothing to do with it. So, Challenger explosion? Yep. So.
Where were you at the time?
Off the coast of Florida on a Coast Guard cutter.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And what was weird about that is we were on the Gulf side and we're underway and we're listening on the HF frequency. And I just remember our guys, you know, all going in to help, which of course is futile, but you know, you still respond. And then immediately turning around and trying to leave the area because there's debris falling on them. So, you know, those are the type of things that, you know, again, you sit on that hamster wheel. So let's see. That, TWA 800, John Kennedy Jr. worked that mission. Both World Trade Center, you know, so,
Wow.
you know, yeah, so basically don't ever go anywhere with me.
No,
Because what was it?
I suspect it's all coincidental. No more than that.
Who's the cartoon character with the Charlie Brown? Pigpen. It's got like the little black cloud over him. Or whatever it goes. So, but the next time, and why September 11th, 2001, from an operations point of view, I think was less significant than some of these other issues. Even like the Great American. Great American took so much more, everything having to fall in place to be successful. World Trade Center was, we needed to get everybody off Manhattan. So
Right, because you mentioned how you were able to get over 1 million people off.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing. So
yeah, in
you
what,
want to
24
explain what
hours
you
or something
did,
like that? Yeah.
what the Coast Guard was involved in doing that day?
Oh yeah, so, well, let me get back to the very beginning, because my job as the command duty officer at that assignment, come in about 6 o'clock in the morning. The shift starts at 06, so you're there 5:30, whatever. Mark Gutierrez, who is another one of my buddies who we still keep in touch, off-going guy. We do the normal, you know, as we always, the big joke is that when you had a search and rescue mission going on, it was like, yeah, you know, so-and-so in a skiff went out, the weather started getting rough, the tiny ship was tossed, and there's, you know, you're just still finishing up, whether you're doing the paperwork or there could still be a sortie underway that you're still working, whatever the case may be. Nonetheless. So Mark goes home. I come in, Ethan and Vanya, and a guy by the name of Grant. So we had 2 brand new people that were still on break-in status. And then myself and the radioman. And the first aircraft hit, and everybody who follows this knows exactly the minute, but I had no idea. But it was before 8, I believe.
I think the first might have been, was it 8:46 the first one?
Okay,
Yeah.
that wouldn't surprise me. Maybe I'm
Okay.
thinking before 9, because
Yeah.
the only reason that's even in my mind is because things hadn't really ramped up yet. So usually, you know, in the morning you've got, you know, the command staff kind of wandering through, checking on what happened the night before, and that had not happened yet.
Okay.
So anyhow, sailing vessel Endeavor moored at the World Trade Center Marina, called the Coast Guard and said, you know, Coast Guard New York, this is sailing vessel Endeavor. Ethan Kistler, my radioman, answered up, you know, Endeavor, go ahead. Endeavor comes in, aircraft just hit, or an airplane just hit the World Trade Center. Now, Ethan denies this, and somewhere I've had a recording, I've lost it to time, but Ethan denies it, but I'm pretty sure he said, Roger, because what are you going to say, right? I don't know. But to put it in context, earlier that year, a baseball player by the name of Corey Little had flown his airplane into a building in the East River.
Yes, sir.
He tried to make a 180-degree turn in the East River, didn't do a steep enough bank, and pranged the building and died. I think his flight instructor might have been on board with him as well at the time. Either way, that's what we thought had happened. Like, oh, no big deal, right? It's like, oh, that's pretty crappy. But we were adjacent to the Vessel Traffic Service, which you can imagine as similar to an air traffic control center, only that it deals with the harbor stuff. Matter of fact, with the recent collision down in Baltimore, or actually the allision, because the bridges that are hit, they're alighted, they're not collided, just so you know. A lot of that stuff is all tracked by a traffic service, just like the one we had in New York. So they swung their cameras around, and all we see is smoke. Like, ooh, this is really, really bad. We immediately launched everybody we had, because you got, at a minimum, and this is going to sound really kind of petty, but it's also the reality of the world. Our captain at the time basically said, anytime there's a camera that's showing the water, there better be a Coast Guard strike in that picture. I'm like, all right, whatever. So we send, you know, our guys out, it's still not really knowing what's going on. And a short time after that, the second aircraft hit. My boss at the time, Lieutenant Dana Lopez, still a very good, close personal friend, she came in, and I'm pretty sure she was standing in there when the second aircraft hit, only because she looked at me and mouthed the words, "We're fucked." And that was pretty much, you know, our response. Now, here's why, from the operational point of view, go ahead and just check on that. Okay, so from an ops guy, right? This is why I don't find this to be remarkable. Everybody reacts to stress differently. So, with one exception. whatever the incident is that causes the stress, everybody's stress level spikes, goes way high. When you do what we do every day, which is somebody's dying, my job is to put our people in between their death and where they started their day. And if you can successfully do that, that's all you do. You try and break that negative chain. So everybody's stress is way, way up here. And what happens is, whether you're driving an ambulance, a fireman, or policeman, it comes right back down into a high stress work zone. And you stay in that zone, it's very hyper aware, but you're doing your job. The people who don't do it every day, they stay up here. Those are the people who are not adding value. Okay? Those are the good Samaritans that want to help. They want to be the one to run into the fire and grab that cat. You're like, we got the cat. So those of us that were on that particular side of the operations house, as the stress level came down, it planed out and we stayed in that zone. And that's why I don't find it to be that remarkable. We stopped it for a little bit, so now we're back.
Okay. So we're back. We were talking about 9/11.
Yeah. So we're talking about specifically, the trained operators, like the boat drivers, the people who are out there physically being able to do stuff all the time. Their stress level is going to be higher, but they're going to perform, and they're going to perform well. That's why everybody that's in any sort of emergency service, even physicians, doesn't matter. That's why you do training, so that when things go sideways, that you can get that stress level compacted and then be functional. So where it becomes weird, the highest point in the greater New York area was the World Trade Center. And when you're dealing with radios that have line of sight transmission range, you want to put the antenna on the highest point you can.
Makes sense.
So that and our telephones, the Centrex switch, which is some sort of communications thing outside my scope, and anybody watching this that knows more about it, send me an email, correct me, I'm super cool with that. Even before the buildings collapsed, we'd lost everything. We'd lost all communications. And what we were trying to do at that point was, obviously we're not fighting fires, we're not pulling people out of buildings, but what we are doing is we're pulling people off Manhattan and getting them to where they need to be. There are videos where you see people walking through like the Lincoln Tunnel to get back to New Jersey, or walking across Brooklyn Bridge because the subways are now not running. Everything is just, obviously a disaster. But what was really interesting about it, and this is one of those examples of, I always have like in my mind the resilience of human beings. I don't necessarily believe in the resilience of humanity sometimes, but the human beings I'm pretty cool with. The resourcefulness and the willingness of people to do good things. I had this conversation with Penn Jillette, as in Penn and Teller, because I'd been on his podcast a number of times. We had mutual friends, doesn't really matter. So we were talking about good people doing good things. And every disaster movie from probably the first one ever made. I mean, the Poseidon Adventure comes to mind.
Right, that's
right. That's the people calling over other people to get out first. That doesn't happen. It does not happen. There are stories of people that got out of those buildings that were on fire because someone helped them down the stairs, and that person helped down the stairs did not survive. That's what happens, because people are generally good. It's hard to, in today's society with the information, and I'm using information in air quotes, being so accessible, but people are generally good. Same thing. So what we had was anybody with a boat, whether you were a tugboat driver, whether you were running a ferry, whether you had your own 30-foot, run-around boat or whatever, pulling people off Manhattan and getting them where they needed to go. Dropping off at the docks over in Patterson, or Bayonne rather, or just getting them to any sort of a wharf on the other side of the Hudson, or the same thing on the other side of the East River. And that went on for days, or not days, hours. By the next morning, everybody that needed to be off was off. I like to use the example of the evacuation of Dunkirk in World War II. The Coast Guard successfully evacuated basically a little bit over 1 million people in 18 hours whereas Dunkirk took months of planning and weeks or whatever, and it took 2 weeks to happen, or whatever. It's just mind blowing because people are good and people want to help.
How many Coast Guard craft were involved in this?
So this is even weirder. So pretty much everything that floated. The initial response easily 15 to 20, like right off the bat. Any boat that could get in was there. A lot of our 41 footers, a lot of our ribs, the rigid hull inflatable boats, everybody was there. After we lost communication, I moved down at the direction of our commander to Sandy Hook, New Jersey, because they still had limited communications down there. They had their own radio tower and working phones. And Sandy Hook became, and for anybody who's watching this that haven't been down there, Sandy Hook, New Jersey is kind of like this little spit that sticks into New York Harbor, and that's like the gateway from the Atlantic Ocean to the lower bay. When I got down there, it was like going to a class reunion because, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'm standing on top. I'm standing at the dock in Staten Island where we were stationed, and I had called my wife right after the first airplane hit. After I realized what was going on, I called her. I'm like, turn on your TV. I'll call you later. And I didn't talk to her again for about 6 hours, and I got down to the docks at the Coast Guard station on Staten Island, which is a few blocks from where we were, waiting for a launch to take me down to Sandy Hook, because at this point we have nothing. We can't talk to our command, which was out of Boston, so we're literally just like by the seat of your pants trying to figure out how to do this and what resources we need. So I'm standing on the dock and my phone rings. Now this is cell phone, flip phone days, right? So this is 2001, so my phone rings and it's my wife. I'm like, holy crap, this is awesome. So she calls and I'm like, I need you, because she's working for a big pharmaceutical company, to patch me into Boston. So she tries to patch us into Boston, and it just doesn't work. The phone lines, the ones that are working, are so overwhelmed. It's just insane. So she gives my phone number. I give the phone number to Boston to her. She calls up the command center in Boston, gives them my personal cell phone number to call me. That was the first communication we had with anybody outside, within the Coast Guard, anybody outside of New York City. And that was easily noon to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, somewhere in that time frame. It was because my wife had called me and we were able to, get it in. So I can't remember who the duty officer was up in New York. I just remember it was a woman. I don't remember her name. But it was like, what do you need? I'm like, send everything you have. We will tell you when we don't need it anymore. And they did. They sent anything that was basically able to float came to New York to start, whatever it was, whether it was just do security. By the time most of the people got there, the evacs were done. But walking down the hallways of Sandy Hook Coast Guard base, I was running into people that I had not seen for 10 years. It's like, hey, it's like old home week. Are we out of time?
No, I'm just going to check it. We're still good. So what did you do in the days and weeks after 9/11?
So the biggest thing, got down to Sandy Hook, and that's where we first started drafting. It's going to sound really dumb and mundane, but this is where the paper trail started. Because we had no communication to get anything out. And at that point, moving forward, it was a lot of documenting what we naturally, right? A lot of creating the historical record, not just for investigation purposes or what have you, but just that's what the military does. If you need something written down, it's going to be written down 3 times. And a lot of it was the record keeping from the administrative side. The operational side was a lot of call it waving the flag or whatever you want to call it, but basically the idea was that we wanted the American people to know that we were out there and that there were people that were, well, guardians. I just donated a T-shirt that was given to us by the Admiral, First District Admiral, that was logoed Guarding Liberty, and that was the operation that commenced the day after. It was just, it's hard to even explain because the operational side, which is what I did, fell off after about 2 days, because everybody had been pulled off, but then there was a hyper awareness of everything we did, and like many of the missions that became really, really big, a lot of new programs were born out of it, and a lot of programs, in my personal opinion, that shouldn't have been involved at all, found a little niche of this is why we should do this and make it boost. It's just the way the government works. Everybody wants to get more in their sack, so to speak. So a lot of the programs became more robust as a result of that, and some of them withered off and were replaced. The Coast Guard that's out there today does not resemble hardly anything of what it was when I did it, and that's not a hey, get off my lawn moment. But after 9/11, after the hurricane, is it Katrina, I guess, down in New Orleans and so on, the Coast Guard started getting the recognition of this being underfunded and undermanned is unacceptable. And they started funding the programs again. They started to replace the boats and the ships and the cutters and the aircraft, and started actually funding it to be what it is today, which is the 5th largest air force in the world. The 3rd largest Navy, 5th largest Air Force.
Right.
So
you were in the Coast Guard for only about a year and a half or so after
yeah,
that.
so I retired in 2003.
Right.
So my last day in uniform was in February 2003.
So was the rest of your service at all like the first 17 or 18 years, or had it?
The mood was different, and that's not a negative. It's not a poke in the nose to anybody. It's just that a lot of the missions, I mean, we can do the math. So you figure that I was a mission planner for 14 years. Generally speaking, at a minimum, we're either involved or running, 2 missions a day. If not more, if you want to, depending on how far you want to go down. So we're talking thousands of missions in 14 years. So as part of the team that works on all these, because I don't care what anybody says, there's not one guy flying the helicopter and then he shimming down the rope. It's a team that works together to be successful. That stayed consistent, but the overall mood of our response, I'd like to believe, started becoming much more professional and a lot less of the, hey, we're goofing off fishing over the horizon thing, which we did a fair bit of, just saying. But
so if you were to join the service now, or if you were to speak to someone who was interested in joining the service now, it sounds like what you would say to people, or what you would see, is the Coast Guard now is very different from what it was when you joined in the early 1980s.
I would say that it's much more professional, much more standardized. And the one thing that, I know we're coming up at the end of our time here, the one thing I'd like to leave everybody with is I have a lot of friends that are veterans in all branches of service, and it's not, what is it, 1% or something of the population joins the military, so it's a small community, and we all tend to have the same vocabulary. But my favorite is, the guys will be like, well, when I was deployed to Kuwait, we had to, and I'm like, we got paid the same, right? I slept indoors, they fed me hot food. I know you don't think that sounds important, but we got paid the same. So, but everybody has their niche. I am not a proponent of armed conflict. I think it is the final failure of diplomacy when you have to go into combat. So if you still want to have that service component, making things better for society, I think that the Coast Guard is a really, really good asset for that. It's a great way for you to to help people that you're never going to see, which is really kind of cool. And what I love the most about it is that I spent the majority of my life, all but 10 years, on the East Coast.
I turned 60 in a few weeks. So 50 years I've lived on the East Coast one way or the other. I have met more prior Coast Guardsmen and women living in Nevada than I have anywhere else.
Well, that's a little odd, but in any event, I thank you so much for sharing your story, and of course I thank you for your service to our country.
Well, you know, it's funny. The thank you for your service thing is one of my favorite things because I always like to, you know, the smart ass in me goes, well, you know, we got paid. But somebody recently said, when she is told that, when she says, and so look the person that said that to them in the eye and say, you were worth it. And that's exactly the right answer. So you were worth it.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, sir.